Welcome to another episode of the Acid Trash Jamboree, the home of weird and wild music and cinema. So, up for discussion today are 3 Italian road movies, all from the 1970s that all just so happen to feature crazed killers in starring roles. Now, I'd already seen all these films several years ago, so my thoughts here are based on recent re-watching sessions. So yeah, let's take a look at them. Okay, so we start with Rabid Dogs, and after losing their ace getaway driver in a police shootout, 3 cornered criminals are forced to take hostages. First a hapless woman, then a man and his sickly son, in order to save their skins and make a fast getaway with the big-ass bag of money they just stole. Trapped in a stiflingly hot car, on an increasingly fraught and long-winded journey, temperaments rise to boiling point, with the fugitives not only getting nasty with their captives, but turning on each other too. Will they make it to their destination without further bloodshed? Of course not. Well, this late-period Mario Bava film is a tough watch, not because of all the humiliation and violence on offer, of which there's a fair bit, but on account of how uncomfortable the actors look during literally every scene, the sweat pouring off them and soaking their clothes, to the point where you can just about smell the BO emanating from the screen. Grossness aside though, this is solid stuff. Okay, due to most of the movie taking place inside a car, it's pretty dialogue heavy. The film still manages to maintain a decent amount of tension between the hits of action, mercifully keeping any boring stretches to a minimum. The film's conclusion is satisfyingly chaotic, the actors finally able to leave that infernal vehicle for more than a few minutes. Now, the release history for Rabid Dogs is extremely confusing and convoluted, so I'm not even going to try and talk about it in any great depth, but basically, Mario Bava never finished the film at the time in the mid-70s due to financial difficulties, then sadly he died a few years later. All kinds of edits and versions have been cobbled together by different folks over the years, some of which are apparently terrible and feature cruddy, mismatched footage shot at later dates. The version I'm reviewing here comes as part of this Arrow 3-disc edition. Now, I've no idea how much new footage is inserted here. All I can say is that it certainly looks like a 70s Italian movie from start to finish, as well as sounding the part, with a score of excellent vintage Stelvio Cipriani music, which is good enough for me. The Arrow set also includes the Lamberto Bava and Alfredo Leone version, titled Kidnapped, which I may take a quick look at one day, though apparently it's markedly inferior. On to Hitch-Hike, in which a perma-bickering couple, Walter and Eve Mancini, played by Franco Nero and Corinne Clery, are on a road trip, driving through the USA with their camper van in tow. During a stop-off at some kind of hippie camp, a drunken Walter trips over a stray tent peg and breaks his hand, meaning that Eve has to take over all the remaining driving duties. Soon after hitting the road again, they decide to help a stranded hitchhiker named Alex, played by David Hess, whose car appears to have broken down on the side of the road. Little do they know, but it's all for show. Turns out that Alex is an escaped mental patient and has actually murdered the owner of said car. Once he's along for the ride, predictably, it doesn't take long for Alex's true colours to show. Now trapped with an unpredictable gun-wielding lunatic, can Walter and Eve hold their nerve long enough to survive this hellish ordeal? So yeah, this 1977 outing has ended up the least known of David Hess's so-called psychopath trilogy, in which he ostensibly played different versions of the same character. The other 2 films being, of course, the notorious video nasties, Last House on the Left and House on the Edge of the Park. And yeah, actually, overall, Hitch-Hike is probably my favourite of the 3. Okay, so it's not exactly what you'd call wildly exciting. Yeah, as with Rabid Dogs, quite a bit of the film takes place inside the car. Consequently, the dialogue-heavy script means the pacing is somewhat off in spots, and at just over 100 minutes, you could argue that it's a touch on the long side. Still, I'm a bit of a sucker for road movies in general, especially ones set in bleak, unpopulated areas. And yeah, Hitch-Hike is loaded with gorgeous atmospheric scenery, lots of dusty terrain and barren vistas, so plenty to look at even when the action dries up. The acting is also fairly decent, from the main trio of stars at least. As ever, the fact that the film is dubbed takes away slightly from the power of their performances. But yeah, overall, this isn't one that'll have you rolling your eyes too much at the ridiculousness of the voiceover work. And yeah, provided you ignore the toe-curlingly naff, sub-come-by-arse sing-along tune that crops up a couple of times, Ennio Morricone provides an excellent score too. Yeah, I particularly like the psychedelic, modal acoustic guitar work, which sounds like it could be an excerpt from one of Sandy Bull's blend pieces, which is high praise indeed in my books. Be warned though, this is a pretty cruel and misogynistic movie, even by 1970s standards, so yeah, strap yourself in for some thoroughly wince-inducing, feminist-baiting dialogue and acts of violence along the way. Still, Hitch-Hike just has something that I find particularly appealing, and it certainly keeps you guessing as to what the final outcome will be for all those involved. Yeah, even on my second viewing, as it turned out, as I'd forgotten more or less everything that happened since the last time. At the very least, if you're a fan of those other two Hess movies, or later things like The Hitcher, and haven't yet seen Hitch-Hike, then this one comes highly recommended. Lastly for now, we have The Killer Must Kill Again, in which a sleazebag named Giorgio witnesses a murderer dumping one of his victims into a canal. At this moment, a light bulb goes off in his head, and after casually approaching the killer, as you do, he offers him 20 grand to get rid of his wife Nora for him. With Giorgio otherwise engaged at a party, he leaves the coast clear for his new nameless friend to carry out his dirty work for him, under strict instructions to make it all look like a kidnapping. This he does, strangling Nora with a telephone cable, after which he deposits her corpse in the boot of his car and goes back inside to wipe away his fingerprints. Unfortunately for him, a young delinquent couple named Luca and Laura steal his car whilst his back's turned. And so begins a frantic race to the seaside, where the pair are headed in order to spend some romantic time together, blissfully unaware of the freshly dead body lying in the trunk. Of course, it's only a matter of time before the killer catches up with them, and yeah, chances are he's going to make them wish they nicked a different set of wheels. Meanwhile, the police don't seem entirely convinced by Giorgio's claims that his wife has been kidnapped. Okay, so here we have a stylish mid-70s giallo from Luigi Cozzi. Not strictly a road movie, though a fair portion of it does take place inside cars, so that's close enough as far as I'm concerned. Anyways, as you'd expect, this is full of good-looking people, hyper-kitschy interiors, and it sports a cool soundtrack of wah-wah guitars and funereal organ dirges. But ultimately, I find it to be a pretty tedious affair, hampered as it is by its sub-snail pacing, and rather bizarrely an utter lack of any kind of mystery or intrigue. Yeah, it's almost like Cozzi attempted to invert all the by now well-established cliches of the genre, only to find that a great giallo movie basically lives and dies by its black-gloved, off-screen killer, red herrings, and big reveal. Well, for me it does anyway. Granted, the killer himself, played by the late Antoine St. John, who also appeared in Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, is a pretty creepy and foreboding on-screen presence and carries out some suitably nasty deeds over the course of the film, though in the end his increasingly slow and bumbling nature ends up making him one of the least inconspicuous murderers in cinema history, almost to a comical degree, which got on my nerves after a while. As I said, there are a couple of rather unpleasant scenes here to appease those who like a bit of the rough stuff, though the build-up to these is so drawn out that you'll be lucky to still be awake to even see them. So yeah, not the absolute worst or anything, but certainly a bit of a letdown as far as vintage 70s giallo films go, especially considering how highly regarded this one is in certain circles. Okay, so thankfully it's not as boring as the other Cozzi film that I'm familiar with, the thoroughly unhappening sci-fi snoozer Contamination, though in truth I don't have any desire to sit through it again if I can help it. So that wraps up today's video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe so you can keep up to date with all future episodes, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.